Grand Admiral Thrawn himself has stated that the Star Destroyer is the Empire's most complete warship. Now, I have done a few videos about Star Destroyers in the past, and I've been wrong about some things, right about others. Now, after doing some research and a great deal of thought, I've come to the conclusion that all of us Star Wars geeks, fanboys, nerds, and even game designers may be totally wrong about the features of a Star Destroyer, especially when it comes to its weaknesses. Now, to be intelligent about this, I must apologize because first I have to break your immersion. We must be aware of the reality of the creative process. The Imperial Star Destroyer was first sketched up by the artist Colin Cantwell as something that is directly inspired by both battleships and aircraft carriers. I myself have made a video explaining how a Star Destroyer can be directly compared to a battleship. In fact, there were some mistakes there I need to rectify, but even further, it got me thinking about the entire Star Wars community and how the lore based upon the Star Destroyers could be a collection of terrible misconceptions. Let's begin with this 3D model of an Imperial Star Destroyer I created. This one is Grand Admiral Thrawn's command ship, the Chimera. I intend to use this ship in some battle breakdowns very soon. If we're going to do that effectively, and in a way no one else has, I think we all have to understand the Star Destroyer inside and out first. Let's begin with what we all believe to be the Star Destroyer's most glaring weakness, the shield generators. All of this mess began with this scene in Return of the Jedi where at Endor, the Super Star Destroyer Executor is taken out. The scene begins with two A-Wing starfighters attacking one of the large spheres we see on every Star Destroyer. The sphere explodes, and we cut to a bridge officer saying, "Sir, we lost our bridge deflector shield." Shortly thereafter, a damaged A-Wing kamikazes itself into the bridge. The giant Star Dreadnought seems to lose control and collides with the Death Star in a glorious explosion. From this, writers, starship designers, game creators all began to assume that these domes are, well, the shield generators. But how does this make sense? If that is a shield generator and the shields go down after it was destroyed, that means that this particular device was never shielded to begin with. Why would a shield generator have less shielding than any other part of the ship? That's number one. This seems like an incredibly unreasonable design flaw. Now, perhaps you could argue, oh well, it simply means the shields were already down and they cannot be regenerated as quickly or at all. Okay, that's fine, but even then, you'd also have to argue that the shields are capable of regenerating in some significant way in a matter of mere seconds. But no, the stressful mood of the Executor's bridge indicates that the particular shielding that they referred to had completely failed, which is why Admiral Piet orders that the forward weapon fire to be intensified. Another argument you could make is that those domes are only for an area of the ship that includes the bridge. Thus, the bridge officer reports, "Sir, we lost our bridge deflector shield." Okay, sure, maybe that would work. After all, they are only on the top of the ship and may not include coverage on the bottom of the ship. But those spheres are extremely large and prominent devices sitting out there like big targets. I doubt even these would be dedicated to bridge protection or even the top superstructure there. No, most likely these domes are something else entirely. Not shield generators or projectors or anything that is vital to the ship's defense. The destruction of this particular sphere in this scene is most likely the cue that alerts the bridge crew to the reality of their demise. The shields were taken down rather suddenly, and then boom! The officer goes, "Oh shit, what was that?" Checks his board, and yells, "Yes, they have indeed penetrated the shield and blown up their big ball up there." From this scene and this point on, illustrations of all sorts, from games and lore, has just assumed that this is a shield generator or projector, even though this makes no sense whatsoever. So then, what are these spheres? Well, take a look at the spheres on real ships, which were prominent even back in the 70s when the Star Destroyer was first sketched out. That, space friends, is a radar dome. So that is the inspiration, a long-range sensor, not a shield generator, okay? More likely, there are various redundant shield generators all throughout the ship's hull, and not only does each one cover a certain area, they overlap and reinforce one another. Now I can see that concentrated fire in a particular area of the ship could weaken the shields enough in that area to cause some concern, as it did with the Executor. You know, all these greebles and bumps all over the outer hull of a Star Destroyer? They have a purpose. Perhaps a lot of these things are in fact shield generator nodes. Now here's the other flaw of these ships that I got totally wrong in my video comparing the Star Destroyer to World War II battleships. The main gun placement. Now there is nothing wrong at all and everything right with the wedge-shaped design of a Star Destroyer if you want to put guns on it. However, this was not utilized when the Star Destroyer was actually put together for the movies. I assume that these huge turbolaser turrets back here are super firing like on battleships. Now what does super firing mean? It means that if you have two or more turrets close together, some are set higher than others so that they can all rotate and shoot in a given firing arc without interfering with one another. The problem is that these primary weapons, these giant turbolaser cannons, which we rarely get to see used in action on the big screen, are arranged in a way that severely prohibits their traversal. They can mostly fire just a broadside, and only the front ones can fire forward, and of course, none of them can fire below the ship at all. Although this is flawed, it is also part of the creative process. It's a nod back to the old days of sail when ships fired mostly broadsides. I mean, it isn't even an evolution to World War II naval tactics, which is what inspired much of Star Wars. Not to worry, this can be fixed without changing the design much at all. No, we don't have to move the turrets to another position or anything. The solution is simply to say that these turrets are locked in the standby position. When arming, the aft turrets elevate above the hull enough to clear the one next to it. The nice thing about this is that they could all have elevators. You can even get the forward turret to cover a great deal of the aft firing arc as well. This fixes most of the firing arc issues for these turrets. And why, oh why, are these giant turbolasers not also mounted on the ventral section of the hull? No, I'm not going to say that they're hidden behind doors or something and pop out. That would be simping for this spaceship way too much. Instead, I may have to concede that the ship does have some flaws, and this is one of them. Maybe this hull configuration just doesn't allow for their positioning there. A real battleship's turret mechanism extends several decks into the ship's hull. Now, maybe putting turrets on this ventral side would interfere with the areas committed to engineering in some of the hangar deck, since there is more hull mass on the top of the ship. The rest is committed to storage and hangar operations so that the ship can operate all of its fighters, scout ships, and ground assault landing ships. Which leads me into the overall purpose of most Imperial class Star Destroyers, and that is to be an intimidating siege weapon of sorts. It's not only other starships that are the target of a Star Destroyer, it is space stations, battle stations, and surface targets. Some of these battle stations and surface emplacements are every bit, if not more dangerous, than other capital ships. However, the nice thing about such targets is that they are stationary, so then it doesn't matter if your primary weapons cannot cover every firing arc. That being said, it is a common tactical position of a Star Destroyer to show the most dangerous enemies its front and dorsal section. In this way, they may appear to tilt down a bit. This does two things. It allows all the big turbolasers on the top to attack, and it gives some cover to fighters or bombers that may be launching from the ventral section of the ship. Now there are other types of Star Destroyers that do not possess such a prominent hangar on the ventral section. The Tector class Star Destroyer comes to mind. For those ships, having some turbolaser turrets on the ventral section is very viable. Okay, another common statement is that Star Destroyers have little in the way of point defense to deal with things like fighters, incoming torpedoes, or missiles, etc. There are some that say, oh, it was the Imperial II that lacked point defense, and there are some that say, oh no, it was the Imperial II class that got upgraded with point defense. Either way, it's a pointless distinction. Now, how this theory got started, I really don't know. In Empire Strikes Back, the Star Destroyer Avenger doesn't seem to have any point defense issues when attacking the extremely swift Millennium Falcon. That does not mean, even with stellar point defense weapons, that Star Destroyers aren't very vulnerable to fighter and torpedo attack. They are. This is another nod back to World War II, where even battleships like the Yamato, by the end of the war, had hundreds of AA guns, but never had enough to survive a real coordinated assault by hundreds of planes. This is simply the nature of defense for a large ship. By itself, there is nothing to stop a Star Destroyer from being surface strafed, where fighters or bombers making strafing runs fast and close cannot be tracked and fired upon by as many defense weapons. This is why Star Destroyers have TIE fighters, and probably other smaller ships to defend it. A good Imperial commander will be using the concept of a combination of arms or sorts. Smaller ships and fighters defend the Star Destroyer, and the Star Destroyer defends them with its heavier weapons. And finally, we have the maneuverability issues based upon the thruster arrangement. In fact, most space sci-fi has this problem. I have to admit this issue is the hardest to address. But if good old Thrawn is correct about the Star Destroyer being so good, and he usually is, we really need to address this fatal problem, so here it is. The Star Destroyer is designed primarily for a frontal assault. Its wedge shape means that most weapons will be able to fire forward in some manner. This means the ship works best if it is able to keep the front pointed at the enemy. This is also a battleship, not a fighter that strafes. That means it has to approach the primary objective. It has to then slow down or maneuver in a way that keeps the bow pointed toward the objective. Only Newtonian physics in space for this thruster arrangement says no. There are massive thrusters only on the back of the ship, meaning it can approach, no problem, but with the lack of similarly large thrusters of any kind facing the front, the only way for this thing to slow down would be to rotate on its z-axis and fire its thrusters, which of course means all of its best shields, armor, and armament would then be facing away from its objective. Now, simple maneuvering without thrusters, like for yaw, pitch, and roll, is not as much of a problem without reaction control thrusters as you might expect. Actually, this ship could have many reaction control thrusters that are somewhat small and difficult to see at a distance. Gyros and reaction wheels are another tried and true method for maneuvering a spacecraft. However, such things cannot slow down or alter the vector or heading of the ship. For that, you need a substantial counter thruster or some kind of other tech. Now, this is not an easy reach to make, but the Star Wars universe definitely has gravity manipulation tech. This big dome on the ventral side of the ship is often labeled as the solar ionization reactor, whatever that means. Actually, it doesn't mean anything. It's techno-gibberish. But what if this is mostly some kind of gravity-based device, such as a gravity well generator or something that allows the ship to kind of anchor itself by manipulating the fabric of space-time? And this is where some of you really intelligent people can go to the comments and feel free to explain to us all how the Star Destroyer manages to slow down without having to spin around and fire its rear thrusters. But my money is on some kind of gravity manipulation technology. I would like to believe that Grand Admiral Thrawn was mostly correct, that the Star Destroyer can be optimally effective if used with other ships, and I hope to soon do some battle breakdowns of some of the battles in the Thrawn trilogy by Timothy Zahn. That way you can see how a tactical genius like Thrawn can make the Star Destroyer awesome as it should be. Be sure to comment on if that's something you're looking forward to. Your entertainment is my fuel. Until next time, space friends. Some of these surface emplacements retake. Many of these battle stations and even surface emplacement retake. Some of these battle stations and surface emplacements retake. Some of these battle station retake. God. Some of these battle